Hi, everyone. This is Amy Skinner again, and my guest today is someone very special. I have Temple Grandin here with me. Temple, you've been a hero of mine for a long time, and it's a pleasure to sit with you and chat. Um, what I would love to know is about your life story, how you ended up in the career you have, and how you have managed to make such an influence in the industry. Um,
Well, people ask me all the time how I got involved in horses and cattle. I got exposed to them when I was a teenager. Um, my school had horses. I showed horses. I was put to work cleaning 9 stalls every day, basically ran the school's horse barn. And horses are one of the few places where I was not bullied and teased, where I could have friends through shared interests. That was also very important. And then the cattle interest also got started in high school. We had a small dairy, learned how to milk cows. And then when I was 15, I went out to my aunt's ranch. So that brings up a really important point. Students get interested in things they get exposed to. And if they don't get exposed to it, how could they possibly get interested? I was exposed to musical instruments. I was terrible at it. I could never figure out how to play this little flute that I had. But another kid's going to take off with musical instruments. You've got to get them out exposed to different things. They can find out what they like, find out what they hate. And when I was a teenager, horses were my total life.
and what is it about horses that inspired you so much, that you loved so much?
Well, I just liked working with them. I was proud of the fact I was responsible for the horse barn. Along with cleaning the stalls, I had to put the horses in and out, had to feed them. And one of the big responsibilities was to make sure the grain box was always closed and latched, because you all know what a disaster that would be if the horses got into the grain box. So responsibility, I see the big wooden lid come down and turning a little hasp thing to make sure it's closed. Yeah, I'm a visual thinker. And
Hmm.
that's another reason why I got interested in animals, because animals live in a sensory-based world, not a word-based world. What is it feeling? What is it seeing? I remember working on training my horse to go in the trail class, do the mailbox, to walk over the water canvas with maybe some logs on it, and gradually getting them used to that.
And did you, at a certain point when you were young, realize that you saw animals differently than other people?
I did not know that other people thought verbally until I was uh, in my late 30s. And I've written about visual thinking in my original book, Thinking in Pictures. And then I have a book on visual thinking. In fact, I have a chapter in there on animal consciousness. And I discuss some of the research on different kinds of thinking. And I'm what's called an object visualizer. My memories are like little phone pictures. Things that interest me, it's like snap, take a picture of that, put it in memory. And object visualizers are good with animals. They're good with art, also mechanical things, and photography. And what object visualizers are terrible at is algebra. There's no way for me to remember it. I'm very concerned about a lot of kids that are object visualizers getting screened out. I'll tell you right now, we need them in industry to maintain and fix equipment
Mhm.
because they just see how mechanical things work. Now, the other kind of thinker is the visual spatial mathematical pattern thinker. Think chemistry, computer programming, physics. And there's research to show that the different kinds of thinking exist. In fact, there's brand new research that came out in 2024 that shows that words are not required for thinking. It's just that simple. Um, and and in my book, Visual Thinking, The Hidden Gifts of People Who Think in Pictures, Patterns, and Abstractions, I go over all this research. And I do a lot of talks, and I say, we need these people that are the object visualizers, the non-mathematicians. They're great with taking care of animals, but if you want your factory to not fall apart, if you'd like the elevators to work, you're going to need these people.
Yeah. So, at what point did you discover that you wanted to be in the cattle industry? How did that come about?
Well, it started out as a teenager, and I just got really, really super interested. The other thing I did when I was young is I saw doors to opportunity. And there's a scene in the HBO movie Temple Grandin, which shows visual thinking absolutely accurately.
Mhm.
where I would go up to the editor of our state farm magazine and I get his card because I knew if I wrote for that magazine, that would really help my career. And I became the livestock editor of that magazine. And that's seeing a door to opportunity. Also, being a woman in the 70s in the Arizona cattle industry, that was a big barrier.
Mhm.
Autism was a non-issue, but women were more accepted in journalism. And I very quickly got a reputation that when I covered a cattle feeders meeting, I would summarize the speeches accurately. And I got respect for that. You know, a lot of students, they don't see doors to opportunity. They're right there. And right now, people are applying for all these jobs online and things like that. I think we need to short circuit that. Half of all good jobs are still the back door, you know, meeting the right people.
What was it that allowed you to see these doors of opportunity so easily?
Well, I don't know. It was something I figured out very, very early on. And the other thing I think that helped me, because a lot of even regular kids now are very shy, they don't want to talk on the phone,
Mhm.
um, is that when I was a young kid, I mean, I sold candy for charity. You had to go up and talk to people. The other thing that was done in my generation is social skills were taught. You were taught to shake hands with people. When the parents had parties, 8, 9-year-olds were expected to put their good clothes on, greet the guests, take their coats, serve the snacks. And that taught going up and talking to people. And that's why I had the guts to go up and get the card. And somebody else might be too scared to do it. And then after I got the card, I produced a good article.
Yeah. So being a woman in the cattle industry back then was, from what I understand about your movie and your books, was a huge struggle. What gave you the inspiration or the courage to keep going when it was so difficult?
There were some good people that encouraged me. And where I had most of the trouble was middle management. You know, the bull testicles I put on my car that was shown in the movie,
Mm-hmm.
that was foremans that did that.
Mm.
Actually, some of the people that owned the feed yards were very supportive. Also, there was a contractor that saw my skills and he seeked me out to design projects for him. There were some very good people that served as mentors. I had some very good professors because I had to be tutored in math. I majored in psychology to avoid math. And one of the things I did is when I failed my first math quiz, I got help. Too many students don't ask for help when they get into trouble. I'm very lucky I went to a small college and the math teacher tutored me in his office during office hours. And then for my master's, I had a graduate student tutor me. But I did something about it right away. I did not wait until I was failing the class. I'm finding students don't ask for help. I got 80 students in my cow handling class, and I have 3 that flunked out. They wouldn't answer the emails. I didn't have their phone numbers, and they never asked for help. And I'd plead with them in class, please come forward and ask for help. Where are you having problems? You know, and students have gotten worse on that. And since COVID, it's gotten worse.
What do you credit that to? People's lack of social skills and inability to ask for help.
Too much time online.
Mm.
I listened to a very interesting interview on NPR last night. I only heard part of it on cell phones in the class and things like this. And it has to be limited. You
Mm-hmm.
don't ban them, but it has to be limited. We got to get them off these phones, and it's an hour a day on social media, not 8 hours a day. You limit it. Just like in my generation, TV was limited to an hour a day.
Mm-hmm.
No, they're not learning how to talk to people, how to interact with people. And a lot of young students today scared to death to call up on the phone. Like I give my phone number out in my class. I have 80 students in the class. Maybe 6 or 7 actually called me. And I gave out the number multiple times. It was on the website and it was given out in class orally.
Yeah, that's quite the asset to have the teacher's phone number.
No, I give out the phone number,
Yeah.
and out of 80 students, maybe 6 or 7, because it's a drawing assignment where they have to do a scale drawing. And I've had students say, well, why would you ever want to know how to do a scale drawing? Well, you're in horses. Well, if you ever want to build a new stable, it might be a good idea to know how to do a scale drawing. And the students that reached out to me, they would take a screen picture of their drawing, and then I would help them with their drawing. Those were about 3/4 of the calls.
Wow. You've made some pretty significant influences and contributions to the cattle industry. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Well, I started out, designing facilities, and one of the first things I did, I went around to every feed yard in Arizona and I handled cattle. And I saw what worked in some facilities, what worked in others. But one of the first things I did, and I didn't realize why people thought it was so weird, and this is before I learned that I was a visual thinker, that other people were a visual thinker, I got down in the chute to see what the cattle were seeing. And they'd stop at shadows. In fact, I was just over at one of the beef plants just last Monday, and we were discussing how the time of day was messing up cattle going up the main alley in the yards and making big shadows. So you can open up this big garage door at one time of day, that helped. And other times of day, you got to get the garage door shut because they let a giant sunbeam in. Um, it was shadows, especially sharp shadows, little chains hanging down, coats on fences, vehicles parked next to the facility. And they would stop and back up and try to turn back when they saw these things. And I was the first person to look at those things. And people thought it was weird to get in the chute and see what cattle were seeing. But I guess if you're a verbal thinker, you'd wonder why you do this. And a lot of people are mixtures of the verbal, the object visualizer like me, the picture thinker, and the more math thinker. But one kind of thinker tends to predominate. But the first thing I always tell students, get away from language if you want to understand an animal. It's sensory. I want to tell you about a study we did with a rotated play set, a little kids play set. Now just think about it. Okay, let's just pretend that this book was a child's slide, and think my original. Okay, it looks different this way than this way. And fillies and colts were walked by the play set 15 times until they no longer stopped. They no longer threw their heads up. And when the play set was rotated, it became a new object. And we have a paper that's a reaction to a complex rotated object in the American quarter horse. You can probably find it if you type in Temple Grandin rotated object American quarter horse. And I really like that paper. I did that with Sarah Matlock and Cora, one of my students. And this might explain why a horse sometimes spooks for no reason. Well, something's rotated and it looks completely different. I had one student tell me that their horse freaked out when he saw his feed trough stood up on end. It looked totally different. It's sensory based. Yeah. It's a free access paper on Temple Grandin, an American quarter horse. I don't know why they wanted that in the title, but they did. But that should make it easy to find it. They did that about 3 years ago. And that can explain some of the spooking that happens for no reason. I talked to a man that was in a wheelchair, and I was at a dairy conference, and he was very upset that he freaked out his neighbor's 600 cow dairy. Well, the problem was the cattle had never seen a wheelchair. That should have been gradually introduced. You see, it's something that looked totally different.
So your contribution into feedlots all across the country really had your career take off, didn't it?
Yes, my first projects were the dip fat projects that were shown in the HBO movie. It turned out I had about 6 of those in the early 70s. They were all built by Jim Uhl, a contractor who had seeked me out. And the other thing I did, I wrote about my jobs. I wrote a lot of articles just on how to do stuff. Too often people hang on to their intellectual property too much. No, I put the drawings out there and show people how to make the dip fats. For ranch corrals, I put the drawings out there. I would explain just basic principles of cattle handling. And I've got some books on that. I've got a book called Temple Grandin's Guide to Working with Farm Animals right here. And just put the information out there. I've got plenty of consulting jobs.
So your design is in, do you happen to know off the top of your head what percentage of feedlots and slaughterhouses have your design now in the country?
Well, the piece of equipment that the most cattle go through is a piece of equipment called the center track restrainer system. And if you want to see how that works, you can look up beef plant video tour with Temple Grandin.
Hmm.
Well, 3/4 of the cattle in the country probably go through that. It's 3/4 of the cattle, not 3/4 of the facilities.
Okay.
But basic cattle behavior stuff, that's used in a lot of different places to teach people about cattle handling, because I just have very good, clear instructions. I'm always looking at the practical. How do we do this in a real practical way? And I was a good writer, and writing was very important for my career. And there's other people, they're super good at handling cattle, but their writing is not very good.
Mm.
They can do things with cattle, they can handle cattle better than I can handle them,
Hmm.
but they don't know how to explain it.
Mm.
Uh, and I've written things to explain some of the stuff that they do, because we've got to just teach our regular people to do it. And the other thing I've learned on the good cattle handling is the boss of the place has to care about it. And you have to constantly monitor it. You can put in the best equipment, but you also have to have management that cares about handling cattle quietly and low stress. And you constantly have to monitor it. It's just like traffic out in the highway. I recently read an article where enforcement of traffic rules on a freeway were eliminated for a while because there was some issue about discrimination, and the accidents went way up. Yeah, you have to have somebody that cares about doing things right. Same thing with horses. There's rough stuff that's done with horses that's really bad. And you've got to have a boss that just says, we're not going to do some of this stuff. We're going to just stop it.
It sounds like your ability to influence the cattle industry so much was part perseverance and seeing opportunity, but a good percentage of it sounds like pattern recognition and being able to see where you're needed and what was needed and how.
Well, and also jumping at doors of opportunity.
Yeah.
When I remember when Gary Oden, he was the manager of a place called McElhaney Feed Yard. This was back in the mid 70s. Came to me about designing his dip vat, and I knew how to do the cattle handling part, but the reinforced concrete construction, I had no idea how to do that. And I said, give me 3 weeks. What I said, because this is pre-internet. Fortunately, I knew 2 people I could call to get the engineering for the reinforced concrete tank. And I called them instantly. I also went around and looked at dip vats and measured them, but I had to get an engineered drawing for the steel reinforcing rods for the tank. Yes, and I asked for help on that. Don't try to wing that.
Yeah. And just to clarify, your design is centered around reducing stress in cattle.
Well, absolutely. And you have to reduce stress in cattle. You have to have two things. You have to have a well-designed facility, but the other thing you've got to have is people that want to learn low stress techniques. And it's really important to get the distractions out of a facility, especially a facility they don't go through every day. A dairy cow will learn to walk over a shadow because she's milked, 2 or 3 times a day.
Mhm.
Um, the horse comes to the showgrounds and it's going crazy. I've had people say, why? My horse was fine at home. He went berserk at the show. Flags, bikes, and balloons.
Mhm.
Let's get them used to that before they go to a show. And one of the best ways to get them used to that would be just to decorate the pasture fence with flags and let the horses go up to it. Don't force it in their face. Let them approach flags, bikes, and balloons. Put a bike stationary, then just wheel it around. Okay, wheelchairs, we might want to get one of those too, especially after I just heard about this dairyman who was in a wheelchair, wanted to see his friend's dairy, and the cows had never seen a wheelchair before and got really scared. But get them used to seeing a whole lot of different kinds of things. And that's why I'm thinking right now, there's 3 kinds of flags. The kind of flag like the American flag carried on a horse. Then you got those blade things that are like this. And then you've got the pennants. I don't think I have to train them to every state flag, but I want to train them to the 3 types of flags and a couple of variations of them. And balloons can be scary. Now we have a new issue, drones. And if a drone is just parked up in the air, it's fine. But I had a really stupid news photographer that took a drone and went right into us like this when we're riding horses.
Yeah.
And really stupid. And they came to interview me. I don't think we'll say what news channel did this. And I was being interviewed, and I would go out there, and we were supposed to ride these two horses. They were all tacked up in Western gear, and they were absolutely crazy rearing. I said, we're not riding those.
Yeah.
I've been saying for years, it takes 20 minutes to calm down. Once they get really scared, 20 minutes to calm down. I timed it. It took exactly 20 minutes for them to become rideable. So you have a situation, your horse gets really scared, let's just put it off somewhere and let it calm down. It takes 20 minutes for the cortisol to go down and the heart rate to go down. If you've ever had a near car accident, which I've had when a board came off a trailer, it took me 15, 20 minutes, no, 10 minutes for the swearing to stop, and another 10 minutes to get fully calmed down. And other people that have had a near car accident can relate to that.
How did you get in it? What I'm really curious about is how you got an industry like the cattle industry based on profit and efficiency to care about low stress cattle handling.
I had to sell it on the economics that I could take out one person. Yes, and I knew about let's average the benefits in there and take out a person. I could reduce bruises. I could reduce accidents to people. This is how I sold equipment. I had to just go on it with the economics. And
That's
they would care about that.
interesting. It's very incredible. Your ability to see not just what needed to be done, but how to apply that to an industry that thinks very differently than you is very inspiring to me.
Well, I had to just I'd say, well, okay, let's say it's taking 4 people to run this cattle handling system. Now I can do it with 3. And what they always wanted was a 3-year payout. And I could usually do that. And then some places want a 1-year payout. Well, that's like totally ridiculous. But it was possible to pay for the equipment just on the labor savings in 3 years on a capital improvement.
So what is the majority of your work like now? I know you teach at a university.
Right now, I'm still teaching my class, and I plan to still keep teaching my class. But right now, I'm doing lots and lots of talks where I go out and I talk about the different kinds of thinking and promote this book. I do a lot of talks to business people on, autism groups because I had no speech till age 4, and I talk about the different kinds of minds and how we need these different kinds of minds. And I'm very concerned that so many schools have taken out hands-on classes. I had a student in my class who had never used a ruler to measure anything in her life. We've got kids growing up today totally removed from hands-on things, and they're going to make policy about stuff. No, we need our visual thinkers. As I travel around, the amount of broken elevators and broken escalators I'm seeing are just terrible. And then we need our math minds too. We're not developing our little math minds. And if we want to stay ahead of China on things like electronic circuits, we need our little math minds to figure out ways to cut the power requirements for data centers, for example. They are huge energy pigs. And we need our math kids. We're not developing them. So you might have a little autistic or gifted math kid in 4th grade bored doing baby little math. Needs to be doing high school math. So we're not developing our math kids. We want to stay ahead of China. We need to be doing that. This is stuff I talk to business people about.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course, we need our verbal thinkers too, to organize things. But verbal thinkers tend to overgeneralize. And they don't think of specific ways to fix things. Like I get asked, what kind of accommodations does an autistic kid or dyslexic kid need in the classroom? Well, I can give you some specific things. About 10% of all the population can see flicker on LED lights. Some LEDs flicker, some don't. And you can find those by filming the room in slow motion video on your phone. And that needs to be gotten rid of. Another thing is sequential information present in a written pilot's checklist format. So these are very simple interventions, a little extra time on tests. There's 3 simple, specific interventions I've recommended. You see, it's not abstract. Things you can actually do. So what do you do if you're stuck with the lights and you can't change them and your classroom has no windows? Well, you might bring in a really bright lamp and put it next to that kid's desk to blot out the LEDs and let them wear a hat. Again, this is something specific that you can do. You don't just talk about accommodations in a vague way.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about it, here specific things, and I've been doing these talks for years, and the things I've just mentioned are things that have come up over and over and over again that can be very helpful.
What advice would you give to young people today who might not be um, surrounded by adults that are giving them these kinds of accommodations or these kinds of encouragements you're talking about? How
Well,
can
first of all,
they
what
say,
age of young people? We're talking young adults here.
yeah, let's say middle school, high school, they're starting to realize they think differently, but they don't have accommodations. They don't
Well,
have
let's look at what the specific problem is. Um, I can tell you the first thing I would do to improve the education system is to put all the hands-on classes back in.
Mm-hmm.
Because some of these kids that are really having problems would be great in a skilled trade.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking high-end skilled trade. I'm not talking about laying concrete or shingling roofs. That's just work. But real high-end skilled trades. Um, and these jobs are not going to go away. In fact, I read the Wall Street Journal every day, and I've been following the job market. Middle managers, oh, businesses are just laying them off right now. AI is going to eat a lot of that stuff up. But these hands-on jobs, those aren't going away. And then our math kids turn into gigantic behavior problems when they're bored. We need to be developing them. We're not doing that. We need to be thinking a lot. Also, kids are not learning working skills. That's another big problem. I'm saying kid that's labeled autism, fully verbal, and they've never gone shopping by themselves. Now, I was a terrible student, and when I went away to a special boarding school, they put me right to work cleaning stalls and running the horse barn. I learned how to work. I didn't do any studying, but I learned how to work. And then I made up the studying later when my great science teacher showed me how studying was a way to becoming a scientist. No, I had some very good teachers, and I've got to give them lots of credit for helping me.
How do you think young kids who are struggling with um, social skills and asking for help can start to develop that if they're not inspired or pushed by the adults around them?
Well, I think we got to, reach out to them. All these privacy rules make it difficult, make it
Mhm.
more difficult. Like I get my stuff in my class, and the kids' phone numbers aren't on it. We email them, and they ignore the emails, and this has gotten worse. They're not asking for help, and then they trash their course. And then I find when they do finally ask me, and I said, "How are your other classes going?" And I find out oftentimes they're not going very well. The problem you got today is kids don't tinker and figure out how to do things. I mean, I would spend hours when I was a little kid making little bird kites, trying to figure out how to make them fly. I would just spend hours doing that. Did the grown-ups come up there and show me? No, they didn't. In the 50s, grown-ups let the kids just do stuff. As long as they didn't do anything dangerous, the grown-ups stayed out of it.
Do you think parents are overly involved with their kids today?
I think they do too much for their kids, because I'm just appalled at the amount of kids that have a label that are fully verbal, maybe doing well in school, have never ordered food in a restaurant by themselves, gone up to the counter at McDonald's and bought a hamburger. Just doing basic life skills, having a bank account, learning how to save money. I was learning how to save money when I was 8 years old. In the 50s, I got 50 cents a week for allowance. I was worth about $5 a day. I knew exactly what 50 cents could buy. I could buy 5 Superman comics with it. But if I wanted a 69-cent airplane, I had to save for 2 weeks. I was learning that as a very young child. The parents get too sucked into the label. Well,
Mm.
I've been out to the tech companies. Half those programmers are on the spectrum, the mathematical kind of minds. I've worked with people at maintenance shops at meatpacking plants that I know are on the spectrum, people that owned metal fabrication shops that I know are on the spectrum. And the problem is they're retiring out, And these shops are not getting replaced because we took shop classes out of the schools.
There's a huge increase in autism awareness now. Speaking of labels, um, do you think that the development of awareness of autism is helping or hurting young kids?
One of the problems we got with the autism diagnosis compared to other things is how broad it is.
Mm.
You're going all the way from Einstein, who had no speech until age 3, or maybe Thomas Edison, to somebody that can't dress themselves, that requires 7 days a week, 24-hour care. And so if you're dyslexic, yeah, you have a problem with reading. That's much narrower. And so you've got one end of the spectrum, you're going to need a lot of care. The other end of the spectrum, you want to be teaching them to be more independent. And I think people get too locked into the word.
Mm.
The other thing is when does slightly geeky and nerdy become autism? There's no black and white dividing line. You know, a
So
brain
there's
can either be more thinking or a brain can be more social emotional.
too much diagnosis and not enough development, would you say?
Well, we're not, and the other thing is on the fully verbal kids, we need to emphasize the things they can do. Now, one place, it's a real dangerous place for somebody on the spectrum, is changing bosses. I remember working with a maintenance person at one of the plants. This was about 20 years ago. And he was brilliant. For anything electrical, he could fix. And he'd been in this plant for years in the shop. And the plant got sold. The new owner decided to move him over to another plant. That was a disaster. He should have just been left in his plant.
Um, you've already talked about this a little bit, but pivoting to people getting along with animals, what is the most important thing that you think people can do to get along with animals better?
Well, one of the things is let's try to look at it the way the horse might look at it. And in my book, Animals in Translation, right here, my book, Animals in Translation, I talk about fear memories. And a lot of people are getting rescue horses, and they could have fear memories. And in Animals in Translation, I talk about the black hat horse. And I know the handling history on this horse. It was a BLM Mustang, and somebody had thrown alcohol in his eyes, horrible. And that person was wearing a black hat. So this horse was terrified of black cowboy hats. White cowboy hats were fine, black hats were scary. And if I put the hat on the ground, it was a little less scary. But you see, that's like a PTSD flashback. You see, it's sensory based. Now, if I put the black hat closer and closer to my head, it got more and more scary. That's an example of a fear memory. Another type of fear memory I've seen is with bits. And usually in training, the snaffle, the jointed snaffle is your beginner bit. So if somebody's going to do something rough for the horse, bad things might get associated with a snaffle. Now you think about it, this is one thing I have the students do. I said, now let's take a bridle that's all solid one piece bit and hold jointed bits. And there are different feeling pictures. And I know of cases where they went to a solid bit and everything was fine. It like opened up a new file folder. And then in our right horse class, I was helping with that class. We had a horse that was having problems chomping on the bit. We put a straight piece, a bar in his mouth. He calmed right down because it didn't feel. You see the jointed. If you hold the different bits in your hand, jointed bits feel different than solid bits. And the advantage of having a sensory-based memory is specific. So you get something that feels enough different. It like opens a new file folder.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been hearing for years about switching of bits. I actually did it. I couldn't believe how well that worked. It opened up a new file folder. So if you can find out what the thing is, that can be helpful. But now I can control bits. I can't control black cowboy hats at horse shows. That's going to be a problem. Another horse had a fear of naked white saddle pads. Put the saddle on top, it was fine. Well, I could get rid of white saddle pads. But think about how it would look different, a saddle pad naked versus a saddle pad with saddle on top. And then just weird things, like we were out working on the right horse and someone had taken a Western saddle and stood it up on its horn so that you could see the fleece inside. That doesn't look like a saddle.
Mm.
If you put it on the fence, it looks like a saddle. But you tilt it up and go, oh, wait a minute. I'm waiting for a little novel object problem here. Yeah, let's get them. I think they need to learn how to tolerate the saddle stood up on the horn, because I saw that in a like white fluffy thing. They always used a pad so the inside of that saddle didn't get dirty. And oh, that's an accident they're waiting to happen, because it doesn't look like a saddle when you tilt it up on the horn and look at it from the fleece side.
The last question I have for you is, if there was one thing you hope to be remembered for in your career, your contribution to the world, what would it be?
Well, I want to see that minds that are different get out into really successful careers. And the other thing I want to get across to people, we need these different kinds of minds. Let's look at how different minds can work together. Like visual thinking was the big COVID project, where I went through all the research on the different kinds of thinking. And I did the rough drafts. Visual thinkers are kind of disorganized, and Betsy Lerner, my co-author, fully verbal, very verbal, she straightened it out. So that's different minds working together. Let's look at the factory. On the visual minds like me design all the mechanical things. But you need the mathematicians for the refrigeration systems, which require a lot more math, and to make sure the building is structurally sound and isn't going to fall down, make sure electrical systems are done right. So you need both kinds of minds to build this big factory. They are both important, and they can work together in complementary manners. So I'm doing a lot of talks where I talk about great minds are not all the same. And I tell business people that the first step is you have to realize that people think differently and they have different approaches to problem solving. Like a visual thinker can see something that might be a risk. Let's think of a simple one. I was on an airplane and a businessman put a cup of water on his open laptop while the plane's flying. There's no way I would do that. Another example of seeing a solution to a problem. A lady was upset at the Denver airport because the airlines had lost her stroller, and she had two little kids, and I immediately saw them sitting in a Southwest Airlines blue wheelchair. And then not the other wheelchair they'll fall out of, the Southwest Airlines blue wheelchair. You see, that's just a very simple example of seeing a solution to a problem, and it just came up in my mind like a PowerPoint slide. Just to
Very.
give a real simple example.
Is there anything else you want to leave us with before we
Well,
close?
I understand most of your people work with horses and train horses. Understanding that the animal is a sensory-based thinker. And when it comes to fear, what they see is really important. Sudden novelty is scary. I think it'd be a good idea to get horses to train to drones. You don't just shove it in their face. Something that you don't do. Get them used to, going to all different kinds of places so that when they go to a show, it's not going to be scary. That's something they need to do. I'm a big proponent of using, gentle methods of training. And I'm also find that when you do that, the whole demeanor of the horse changes. It's kind of hard to explain. They're like softer.
Mhm.
They just totally change. Where horses that have been forced, I'm not there's some people that still do a lot of rough training stuff. They tend to not like what the hot-blooded horses, the more high-strung ones. They say, well, Arabs are crazy. Well, if you abuse an Arab, it's going to be more likely to be damaged than an animal that's calmer. The calmer animal, you force it, it might habituate, but the more flighty one doesn't. They can get more easily traumatized. Changing attitudes towards things. That's something that's really important. And also be a good observer. Okay, what's your horse looking at? Watch the ears. The ears point to different things. I call that ear radar. What is it looking at with its ears? These are things you need to be looking at. Now, most of your people, are they showing horses, just riding for pleasure? What are they doing?
Most of my people are probably riding for pleasure. And probably most of my horse people are working with a horse that's been emotionally damaged in some way.
Well, one of the things, if you can figure out what the fear memory is and eliminate it from the horse's world, where with a bit you can do that.
Mhm.
Black cowboy hats, that horse might never be totally safe to show at a show because I can't get rid of black cowboy hats. They're going to be there. Um, but there's other things if you can figure out what's setting them off, because the fear memory that sets them off will be sensory based. Vision often, but I've also run into horses where the snaffle bit was the bad thing, the jointed bits, because that's beginner bit. So that's what they, it doesn't mean snaffles are bad. Some people, so when you're saying snaffles are bad, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that that's the bit that often gets associated with bad things. The other things, you just try using a hackamore. Don't use a bit, but you got to figure out if you don't know the handling history. If I know the handling history, but I find people tend to be very generalized. They'll say, my horse is crazy. Well, I can't help you with that. Well, after questioning the person a whole bunch, I finally found out that the only place the horse went crazy was in cross ties because he had an accident cross ties. I said, okay, let's just not use them. That's an easy one. I can just eliminate cross ties. But if it's something I can't get rid of, like the black hats, I'm going to have to just carefully work on desensitizing that. But the problem you can get is just like a soldier that's had a traumatic experience, is that these fear memories can pop back.
Mhm.
That's the thing that's really bad. Now, if it's something I can eliminate, like cross ties, that's easy to eliminate. Or you can get feeling memories. A very common thing a horse will do is bucking when you change gaits. Now, that's because they were trained too quickly. Put your backpack on and walk, trot, and canter with it, with your own backpack, and see how it's a different feeling picture. It feels totally different if you do walk, trot, and canter, just yourself. So what's happening when you change gaits for that saddle is you've all of a sudden got a different feeling. So when you first start training the next gait with the saddle, you maybe just trot for just a few steps. The other thing is, I was a lady in our right horse class. They do everything with saddles on, and this lady decided to ride her horse bareback, and it bucked her off. Well, think about it. Riding bareback feels different than riding with a saddle. It had never been ridden bareback, and it was a totally different feeling picture. And the accident was very serious, so it was bad. But think about it. If you ride with a saddle, let's say you ride with a pad. Let's say you got a horse that bucks when you change gaits. What do I do with it? I had one of those when I was in high school, and now I know how to fix him. He was a Western trained horse. I had a beautiful set of English tack. I would have just switched him over to English tack. And I would have put a saddle pad under that saddle that would have felt totally different. And then very carefully adjusted him to that. He was beautiful, beautiful sorrel, but he bucked when you went from a trot to canter. Well, I was in my late teens and early 20s, then I didn't know the things I know now. But I would have made him into an English horse very gradually, because that saddle would feel totally different. And then he probably would have been just fine. But that's a very common thing that happens. And you're going to have to change. The easiest way to fix that is to change the feeling picture with a saddle and a pad that's going to feel completely different. And I had the tack. I could have made him an English horse. Would have been fine. One of the things I've found is once you learn to post English, I'll do it in a Western saddle. I know you're not supposed to, but it's just so much more comfortable.
Yes, it is.
I post in a Western saddle. I
Do you
know in that
still
show
ride?
I didn't do that, but try to think about it. It's a sensory-based world, not a word-based world. And then when I really emphasize this in my book, Animals in Translation, and then I have another book, Animals Make Us Human, there's a chapter in there on horses where I discuss clicker training, and that's been very successful with Mustangs, where they do any little piece of positive behavior, they're rewarded with a click. In fact, Sarah Matlock, during COVID, one of the big COVID projects, they got a bunch of Mustangs from the BLM, and about 3/4 of these Mustangs, they got them trained so you could halter show them. And then they had a show, and it was all women that trained them, where strange men showed these Mustangs at halter. I went to that show. That was pretty phenomenal. That was done by my colleague Sarah Matlock.
A lot of students really struggle with talking too much when they're working with horses, especially when they get nervous. And it becomes really hard for them to observe when they're talking. What advice would you
Oh,
have?
maybe they need to stop talking.
Yeah.
Also, animals are very sensitive to tone of voice. One thing we've had to do in cattle is like get people to stop screaming at them
Mm-hmm.
because they understand the intent of that angry behavior. They understand that intent, even though they don't know what you're saying. And if I went, good horse, instead of like that, I think they're going to react very well to that.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very, very sensitive to tone of voice,
Mm-hmm.
emotions, and they need to shut up and stop talking. They're trying to knows they're talking to you when they're trying to figure out what's wrong with the horse.
Well, they're talking just to the horse, to themselves, to me. It's nervous chatter, very mindless chatter.
Well, I think maybe they just need to concentrate more on what the horse is doing. Well, I think it's one thing I always keep saying, to understand animals, get away from language.
Yeah, that's
And these things with the other thing is the verbal mind overgeneralizes. I don't know how many people come up to me and say, my dog is crazy, my horse went berserk, and then I got to ask all of these detailed questions of exactly where and when it went berserk. Like the thing with the cross ties,
mm,
I had to ask it by the time I got a sixth or seventh question. I finally figured out he went berserk just in that one place because he'd had an accident where he tipped over backwards in the cross ties. Or if the other really important thing, make sure that your horse's first experience with something like a trailer, you teach them to load, is good. First experiences with new people, places, or things that are bad, animals don't get over that. Let's make sure that first experiences with new places are at least neutral. Because if first experiences with a new person, a new piece of equipment, which would be a trailer, or a new place, let's say a new riding arena, are bad, they have a hard time getting over initial bad experiences with something new. Always the thing about new things, they're interesting if the horse can voluntarily approach it. Like if I put a chair out in the middle of the pasture, all of the horses are going to go up to it. And let's say it's a light beach chair and it's blowing in the wind, the horses are going to be terrified of it. I also repeated the rotated object test for the large green chair with Western riders. Well, everything was done at a walk. I just wanted to demonstrate that when you rotated it, it became a new thing. So the Western riders walked by this big, huge green chair until they no longer stopped, no longer looked at it. Rotate that chair 90 degrees, half the horse's hard stop. Now that was done at a walk. If it had been done at a canter, the riders would have been thrown.
mm.
No, I did everything at a walk on these experiments. I don't want anything dangerous happening. I just wanted to prove that that rotated chair became a new object. So just think about a car. It looks very different from the front than from the side. Get them used to different vehicles, used to different people. Some of the animals that have the biggest problems lead to sheltered life. Way too sheltered life. And horses don't get out and have enough chance to run around. We have a lot of problems with stallion behavior. That's really abnormal behavior because they're just kept locked up in stall.
Yeah, that's a sad life.
No, they need chances to get out and run around. And then what we do with our horses in Denver, where they're there's no pasture. They take two horses that are good friends, and you have to teach them that that big, huge ball is fun. Don't scare them with it. You have to very gradually introduce it. Our horses will bat that thing around, rear and jump, and do all these behaviors you would never do with a rider on them.
Mhm.
And then we let them take them in pairs, and they let them loose in the big arena. They just run and jump and play with the ball. They're having a great time with the ball. But you got to introduce that ball right. You got to make sure that it's introduced very carefully, allowed to voluntarily approach it, because you don't want to have them be afraid of it. If they're afraid of it, they're not going to play with it. They have to learn that it's fun to take their head and just sort of like cattle and butt it and push it all around, and then they'll just run and rear and kick and do all this stuff. Oh no, you wouldn't do that with a rider. But they're able to get some exercise, and that's what we need to be doing, things like that with horses that have to live in stables. Because in downtown Denver, there is no way to pasture them. Can't pasture them on the roads.
Yeah.
But I think that's something that seems to work out, and they can actually, there's enough in the big arena, enough space so they can run really fast and exercise. And they have to be carefully trained to this. And I've seen it, boy, they just have a great time.
You've left us with some really great advice, really inspiring information, and I just thank you so much for your time. Your
Okay, well,
career has been very inspiring to me for my own, so I appreciate all your contributions.
okay, well, and I want to see horses are a great activity to get. Okay, you get kids that maybe have autism, ADHD, or what they call kids that have had difficult backgrounds. Get
Mhm.
them out with horses can be really a great thing to do. I had friends through horses. I also learned how to work through horses. I have another paper they might like. It's also a free download. How horses help the teenager with autism make friends and learn how to work. How horses help the
That's
teenager with
great.
autism make friends and learn how to work. That paper's a free download.
Thank you. Yeah, excellent.
And my livestock website is grandin.com. Um, and then, of course, I've got lots of, there's a lot of autism books on there. My original autobiography is Thinking in Pictures. I have books on early intervention for little kids, books on employment. This is a book on autism and adolescence. Lots of resources, and I approach it the same way I did with my cattle handling stuff. What are just practical things you can do in the classroom to help? Like, I need an external working memory. So if I'm working at Starbucks, I need to start out with a pilot's checklist of how to make an espresso. Let me just write down the steps. Or how to close a cash register out, for example. Let me just write down the steps. And when I worked in a dairy, they had a checklist on cleaning the dairy equipment. That saved me. Because you do it wrong, you might run soapy water into the milk tank and destroy a tank of milk. You're probably going to get fired if you do that.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it.
Okay, well, great. I'll sign off now. And
It was
it's been
wonderful to talk to you.
great to talk to you.
Thank
Okay,
you. Have a great day.
I will. Thank you. Yeah, bye.
Bye.